Hello, everybody. My name's Kurt Johnson. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer over here at Beyond Identity. If you're unfamiliar with Beyond Identity, we launched our company in April 2020 around a mission to change the way the world logs in, eliminating passwords and the risk and vulnerability and friction they cause, reducing and eliminating fraud, and replacing it with a fundamentally more secure form of authentication that at its roots eliminates passwords and replaces it with the highest level of security possible to enable organizations and customers to achieve higher levels of security while at the same time removing friction. Zero trust is a term that's been tossed around a lot in the industry, and it means many different things to many different people. But at the heart of it, it really is around every user access needs to be verified, authenticated, authorized, and monitored. And really what I want to talk today about is how do we take these principles, this philosophy, this journey of zero trust to bring it back to that first level of interaction, which is authentication, and think about authentication in a more modern, broader context than what we have historically. Because let's face it, authentication fails have happened everywhere. Passwords are a disaster for organizations who've had them breached, for end users who are complexity of trying to remember them, for our help desks and customer service centers who are overwhelmed with calls for forgotten password resets and locked out users. I love my password is something no one has ever said anytime. And recognizing that over 80% of the breaches are a result of stolen and misused credentials. It's incredible the proliferation they still have today. Dr. Chase Cunningham says this well. If I tell you I'm going to punch you in the face, why do you protect your midsection? So we know we have to do something. And historically, MFA was that answer. But we also recognize that multi-factor authentication also was wrought with user friction and pain. And more, we're seeing the adversaries move their focus of attention to attacking traditional MFA. Whether that are all the phishable forms of MFA, such as email links and SMS pushes, OTP, and certainly we're seeing the significant increase in barrage of attacks just doing the bulk pushes, because we all know at the end of the day, the end user is ultimately going to click that and allow the adversary in. In addition to that, when we move to an environment where any device can access cloud-based resources and SaaS-based resources and business partners and customers, that basically any device can provide access, from mobile devices to handhelds to even the Internet of Things and devices themselves gaining access. And recognizing, are those devices authorized? What level of trust do we have? What does the security posture of that device look like? And historically never doing that at that point of authentication. And too often authentication for many was a one and done event. It was like your bouncer at a nightclub who removed the velvet rope, but once you were in the club, you were unmonitored and nobody knew what you were doing. And the need for us to evolve our thinking. Unfortunately, what these fails have resulted in is a significant increase in the types of attacks and the consequences. I mentioned the data showing over 80% of attacks happen from stolen and misused credentials, but we also took a look at the MITRE attack framework. And when we really peeled it back, even some of these most sophisticated, infamous adversaries here in the word skull actually went to using and misusing valid credentials as their primary form of launching attacks. Even these sophisticated adversaries are recognizing it's better to hit the easy button than to burn up a new 0 day. And then on the right here is from the Verizon data breach report, which focuses on ransomware. And we've all seen the headlines of what ransomware has done and the pain it's caused so many organizations and individuals alike. And the most prominent form of ransomware happens with desktop sharing software, RDP and remote access software. And the overwhelming attack vector for that type of attack is stolen and misused credentials and passwords. So it's impossible to argue the fact that we need to change our thinking. We need to move to a more modern form of authentication. And in doing so, we need to look at the most prominent high volume areas of attack. And that's the individuals and trying to spoof an individual and misuse credentials or steal credentials to identify themselves as that individual. but it's also the device itself. And what is the state of the device? What's the vulnerability? Really boiling it down at the end of the day, we need to take a new approach that helps us recognize not only who, but what is gaining access to critical resources and personal information and very sensitive information. And to do that, we need to modernize our authentication approach with what we're talking about or calling a zero trust authentication approach, which brings those principles and ideas of zero trust to the point of authentication to really focus on key areas. First is establishing high trust in the user identity. And we can't do that through passwords. We need to use FIDO certified authentication that's unphishable to truly identify the individual on the other end of that access. And while we might like to say, oh, Kurt's in the healthcare system or Kurt's in Salesforce, it really is the device I'm on. And we hope Kurt's on the other end of that device, but what does that device look like as well? And how do we establish high trust in the device itself? I have the picture of airport security here because when you go to the airport, you need to show your government official ID to know it's you, but you still have to go through the image scanning or the metal detector system. And if you leave that secure area, even a minute later, they're going to ask you for those same things again, and you're going to have to go through that form of verification. We need to bring that idea and concept to the idea of user authentication and user access. But unlike the airport, we can't do it by increasing the friction. And so what that also means is we, need to understand what state of that is that device in. Is jailbroken? Does it have any risks or vulnerability? If it's accessing patient data, should disk encryption be on? But also where we have made investments in endpoint detection and response tools or MDM tools that we can incorporate the risk signals from those third parties as well to give us a higher level of visibility into the state of that device and if that device is vulnerable at the point of gaining access, especially to some of the most sensitive information. And we can use those signals to make risk-based policy access decisions. And the key piece here is we're not doing it once, but it's on a continuous basis. And that we continuously evaluate and reevaluate those user risk signals, the device risk signals, and where anything has come out of policy or presents a risk, we can take immediate corrective action, including disabling that session and requiring that user to re-authenticate, even frictionless, without friction, to bring back the certainty we have in that user and device and deny access if it doesn't meet our policy. By doing this, we can really truly eliminate some of these most highly sensitive, highly concerning, increasing volume of attacks. And I mentioned not only the stolen credentials, but the significant increase we've seen in the volume of attacks bypassing traditional MFA. And while that has hit phishable forms of MFA, as I mentioned, such as SMS and email links, in a higher volume of incidents, we're also seeing a significant increase in volume in man-in-the-middle or adversary-in-the-middle type attacks. And unfortunately, this has not just the tactics of highly sophisticated adversaries, it's increasingly becoming a paint-by-numbers approach where you can download a kit from the dark web or even from repositories that allow individuals to launch their own reverse proxy phishing attacks. They set up a site, they send a phishing link to an end user, they click that link, they're asked to log in, and it looks exactly like the page they expect. They put in their username password, they get a step-up authentication, they put in that PIN code, and they're in the site without anything looking like it is malicious. Unfortunately, the adversaries on the other end, not only capturing those credentials, but capturing the token, for the MFA token that can be used to gain access into those systems. And as I mentioned, it's not just the user themselves, it's the device they're on. And seeing access from unauthorized devices is something we need to really bring to our authentication decisions. True story from an organization where the CISO had their head of treasury who got a call from one of their employees, needed to transfer a significant volume of money and required the head of treasury's approval. And he just happened to be traveling and sitting in a concierge lounge. And instead of going back to his hotel room where the highly secured and managed computer was, just used the computer in the concierge lounge, logged in, did the step-up authentication, transferred the money, logged out, but unfortunately, there was malware on that machine that left that session accessible to an adversary who went and transferred a significant amount of dollars that leveraged this misuse and this bypass credential sitting from malware on that device. So at the end of the day, that's really kind of the concept of bringing this together. And the idea is that when an access request is made through an IDP, it can do a delegated session to enable phishing-resistant MFA that identifies the user leveraging the biometric in a FIDO-certified approach, but also captures device security posture. And where organizations have made investments in third-party tools like endpoint detection and MDM, bringing those signals in at the point of authentication before access is granted. And even pushing and enabling continuous policy checks that we can push negative and risky-looking incidents into SIM tools or even IGA tools. And if anything does change on that device, we can immediately disable access, even integrating in or quarantining through that the EDR or integrating into zero trust network access solutions to discontinue that access. Really looking at this as a team sport, that where organizations are making investments in fraud detection and third-party risk, endpoint detection and response tools to pull those risk signals in at that point of authentication. So finally, in the words of Albert Einstein, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. I say we need to bring this thinking and bring this level of insanity. We need to eliminate it when it comes to authentication. We need to eliminate passwords. We need to increasingly eliminate some of the traditional phishable forms of MFA, leveraging FIDO-based authentication, leveraging device signals to make proper risk-based authentication decisions at that point of access and on a continuous basis. I thank you very much for the time today. I thank FIDO for inviting us to participate in this great event. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. And we feel so strongly about this, we just wrote a book about it. And with our partners at Aimpoint, we wrote the book on zero trust authentication that's available on our website or by reaching out to me. And really appreciate you joining me today in this very important session and working together how we can truly help organizations secure access to sensitive personal information and at the same time, make it a significantly better user experience. Thank you.
I was on mute. Kurt, thanks so much. I love that you used that quote. I actually use that quote as well, just in talking about the just continued sort of cycle that we've been on, which seems like forever, of just passwords, credential stuffing, phishing attacks, et cetera. So good on you for being a mind twin on that one.
Thank you, Megan.
So thanks so much, Kurt. If you want to get in touch with Kurt, please do reach out at the contact information that you see, well, that you did see earlier.
Thank you very much.
So thank you, Kurt.